I found out on my 18th birthday that my parents had spent all of my $200,000 trust fund to support my older sister Corey's shopping addiction, and then decided to kick me out. To give you some background, Corey has Down syndrome and is 4 years older than me. From the time I was little, I understood that Corey was different. Even as a kid, I noticed how she would overreact to almost everything. If something didn't go the way she wanted, even something small, she'd scream or cry in a way that other kids didn't. It was like she couldn't handle even a little frustration when things didn't line up with her expectations. Corey didn't really have friends growing up. She had trouble understanding social cues and often came across as blunt, maybe even rude. She didn't mean to be, but her straightforwardness was hard for other kids to deal with, and most of them didn't know how to respond to her condition. Because of that, she ended up spending a lot of time alone, which only made her feel more isolated. My parents tried to address this by involving me in her social life. They'd insist I bring Corey along whenever I was hanging out with my friends. I knew they wanted her to feel included and have some kind of social interaction, and at first I didn't mind. I figured maybe she'd make some friends through mine, and I thought it'd be good for her. But hanging out with Corey in social settings wasn't easy. Her social skills were limited, and she often had trouble fitting in with groups. Sometimes she'd act out unpredictably, like pushing or hitting other kids if they had something she wanted. As a result, my friends didn't want to hang out with me anymore if Corey was around. They didn't want to deal with her sudden outbursts, and honestly, I understood. They were just kids trying to have fun without the added stress of handling her behavior. I knew it was my responsibility to support Corey, especially with her challenges, but I also needed space to grow, make my own friends, and live my own life. My parents didn't see it that way. Anytime I wanted to spend time with my friends without Corey, they guilt-trip me with lines like, "Sisters should stick together," or, "You need to think about Corey." It felt like I was expected to prioritize her needs over my own every time. What made it worse was that my parents never seemed to teach Corey how to improve her behavior. They didn't try to help her learn things like sharing or being gentle with others, things that could have made it easier for her to connect with people. Instead, they left it all up to me to fill in the gaps. Over the years, I became her only friend by default. Don't get me wrong, I love Corey. She's my sister, and I know none of this is her fault. She faces challenges every single day that I can't even imagine. But that doesn't change how it feels to be the invisible child in our family. My parents' whole world revolved around Corey. Every plan, every decision, every dollar seemed to go toward making her life better or more comfortable. Corey needed constant care, and my parents spent a fortune on her therapies: physical therapy to help her coordination, speech therapy to improve her communication, and occupational therapy to build her independence. On top of that, she had regular medical tests and checkups to monitor her progress. It was a lot of time, money, and energy, and while I understood why it was necessary, it often felt like there was nothing left for me. One of Corey's biggest challenges is her lack of impulse control, which makes boundaries nearly impossible for her. For example, she has an obsession with the color pink. If she sees something pink, it's like a magnet for her. She has to have it. It doesn't matter if it's a wallet, a toy, a shirt, or even someone else's belongings. Once it's in her hands, she clings to it, and if anyone tries to take it away, she'll have a meltdown. This behavior has caused a lot of awkward situations, especially in public. My parents often end up bargaining with strangers or outright buying pink things from them just to calm Corey down. Over the years, I've watched them spend money on all kinds of random pink items. It might not mean anything to the rest of us, but to Corey it's everything in that moment. I get why they do it. For her, it's not just a want, it feels like a need. But watching my parents pour so much time, money, and energy into soothing Corey's impulses has left me feeling overlooked. Their approach to parenting her has also created another problem. Corey now has what I can only describe as a full-blown shopping addiction. It all started small. Every weekend, my parents would buy Corey something pink, whether it was a toy, a piece of jewelry, or some little trinket to keep her happy. They used it as a way to bargain with her for good behavior during the week. They'd tell her, "If you want that, you need to be a good girl." And Corey would agree without hesitation. What began as a temporary arrangement turned into a regular tradition in our family. These pink purchases weren't cheap. Many of the items Corey wanted were unique or custom-made, which meant they came with a hefty price tag. For a long time, I didn't think much about the cost. I figured my parents had it covered and didn't question how they managed to keep up with it week after week, year after year. But eventually, I found out something that left me completely stunned. My parents hadn't been managing these expenses through budgeting or savings. Instead, they had drained the trust funds my grandparents had set up for Corey and me. When I was born, my grandparents generously created a trust fund for both of us, with equal amounts set aside. For Corey, the money was meant to cover her treatments and anything else she might need as someone with Down syndrome. My share was intended for college or to help me get started in life, maybe to buy a house one day. Only my parents had access to the funds, and my grandparents trusted them to manage the money responsibly. From the time we were young, both Corey and I knew about these trust funds. My grandparents had always made it clear that the money was there for us when we needed it. I grew up feeling secure, knowing that the trust fund would be there to help me when I reached adulthood. When Corey turned 18, she received her share of the trust fund. Since she still lived with my parents and relied on them for care, they managed her money. Over the years, they used it to pay for her treatments, therapies, and other needs, expenses that only grew as she got older. I never questioned how they spent Corey's money. I assumed they were using it as intended to give her the care she needed. When my 18th birthday came around, I naturally expected to receive my share of the trust fund, just like Corey had. I'd been planning for it. The money was supposed to cover my college tuition, and I hoped to save the rest for other expenses as I started my adult life. I had everything mapped out, and I relied on that trust fund to help me build a stable future. My grandparents threw a big celebration for my 18th birthday, just as they had for Corey. I'd been looking forward to the party for years. Everyone in the family was there, and I felt surrounded by love. It was one of those days that felt perfect in every way. After we cut the cake, my grandparents made an announcement. They spoke about how proud they were of me for reaching this milestone and shared that, as my birthday gift, I'd be receiving the trust fund they had set up for me years ago. The whole room erupted in cheers, and people started congratulating me. I was overwhelmed with gratitude as I hugged my grandparents, thanking them for their generosity. But as the excitement filled the room, I noticed something strange. My parents weren't smiling or joining in on the congratulations. They stood off to the side, looking tense and uncomfortable. They exchanged glances, their expressions strained. I thought it was odd, but I pushed it out of my mind so I could enjoy the rest of the celebration. Later that evening, when we got home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My parents were quiet and on edge. At first, I assumed they were worried about something related to Corey, her health, her mood, or maybe something she needed. But Corey seemed perfectly happy, playing with one of her new gifts. Finally, I asked my parents what was going on. That's when my dad looked at me with a serious expression and said they needed to have a private conversation with me. The tone of his voice sent a chill down my spine. I knew whatever he was about to say wasn't good. We sat down in the living room, and my parents exchanged uneasy glances before my dad began. He hesitated, then explained that they wouldn't be able to give me my trust fund as my grandparents had intended. First, I didn't understand. I asked him to explain, and that's when he admitted the truth. Over the years, they had used all of Corey's trust fund on her expenses. When her money ran out, they started dipping into mine. My dad sighed heavily and confessed that 90% of my trust fund was gone. There was almost nothing left for me. I sat there in shock, trying to process his words. The money that was supposed to pay for my education to set me up for the future, it was gone. He went on to explain that most of it had been spent on Corey's shopping addiction and her various treatments. As he spoke, I felt a numbness wash over me. My mind raced, struggling to comprehend how this could have happened without me ever knowing. I couldn't believe my parents had used my trust fund without telling me, just to support Corey's expenses and shopping habits. I asked them point blank why they would do this to me. Their voices turned defensive as they started explaining themselves. They said caring for Corey had been financially draining, and that they had no other choice. According to them, her needs always came first. My dad went on about how much they'd spent on therapies, treatments, and of course the endless stream of pink gifts to keep her calm. I pushed back, arguing that they could have stopped buying all those unnecessary things when it became clear they couldn't afford it. But they insisted the items weren't just luxuries for Corey. They were tools that helped her cope, things that made her life easier to handle. In their eyes, it had all been worth the expense, no matter the cost to anyone else. Anger bubbled up inside me. I asked them how they could justify spending nearly all the money meant for my future without even discussing it with me. Did I not matter to them at all? My dad tried to calm me down, saying I needed to understand the sacrifices they'd made as Corey's caregivers. He described the constant pressure and exhaustion of meeting her needs week after week. My mom chimed in, saying Corey's condition required endless support, and that sometimes they had to make financial decisions that might seem unfair to me, but were necessary for Corey. Then they said something that hit me like a slap in the face. They claimed that because I didn't have Corey's challenges, I already had an advantage in life and shouldn't be so greedy about the money. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. I told them this wasn't about me being selfish or greedy. I wasn't questioning Corey's needs or their choice to prioritize her care. I loved her too, but what I couldn't accept was the dishonesty. The fact that they had gone behind my back and taken what was supposed to be my future without even thinking I deserved to know. I reminded them that the trust fund had been my one source of security, the one thing I thought I could rely on to build an independent life. Now it was gone. Instead of acknowledging my hurt and betrayal, they turned the conversation around on me. They accused me of being selfish and said they were disappointed that I couldn't be more understanding. They told me I should recognize that sacrifices were necessary, and after all, we're all in this together. I was floored. They genuinely expected me to accept it all without question, as if my own feelings didn't matter. I asked them why everything always revolved around Corey. Why was it never about me? Did they not care about what I wanted to do with my life? That's when they dropped another bombshell. They revealed the plan they had for my future, a plan they never once discussed with me. They explained that their expectation was for me to take over caring for Corey, both financially and emotionally. My mom looked at me with this mix of pleading and resignation, saying, "You know we're getting older, and it's exhausting taking care of Corey. We won't be able to do this forever, so we need you to step in." She went on to suggest that I could still go to a local college nearby instead of the one I'd chosen. That way, I'd be close enough to help with Corey. Once I graduated, they expected me to find a stable job and take Corey to live with me so they could finally have some rest. My dad even suggested I start contributing financially while I was still in college by getting a part-time job and sending money home for Corey. He said it would allow her to maintain the lifestyle they created for her, letting her buy whatever she wanted and keeping her happy. I just sat there numb. I couldn't believe what they were asking of me. They expected me to give up my dreams, my plans, and my independence to take on their role as Corey's caregiver. All of this without ever considering what I wanted for my own life. Finally, I couldn't hold back anymore. I yelled at them, my voice trembling with anger and years of pent-up frustration. "Have you ever thought about what I want? Or am I just here to live for Corey? You never even asked me what I wanted, did you? All these years I've had to give and give, and now you're expecting me to take over for you so you can rest. How is that fair?" My voice cracked as I continued. "You're making decisions for my life without even thinking about what it means for me. I can't just drop everything for Corey and pretend like my dreams don't matter." Years of being overlooked, of being told to put Corey first, came pouring out of me. I was done staying silent, done pretending everything was okay. But my parents wouldn't back down. They kept trying to convince me, telling me I was being selfish and inconsiderate. It was as if they expected me to accept a life I never agreed to just because they decided it was what was best for Corey. Since that night, I've been ignoring my parents completely. I can't bring myself to talk to them, not after everything they've said and done. I don't know what to do next, but I know one thing for sure. I can't let them dictate my life anymore. All I feel for my parents now is resentment. I've been seriously considering reporting them for stealing my trust fund and spending it on my sister. Update 1. Wow, I never expected this post to get so much attention so quickly. Thank you to everyone who offered advice, I really needed it. I'm currently on my way to tell my grandparents everything. Since the trust fund came from their money, it feels right to let them know what's happened, and to have their support as I navigate this mess. Once I explain everything to them, I'll let my grandparents take the lead on deciding what to do next. I trust their judgment and know they'll prioritize what's best for me as we work through this together. The reason I stayed quiet about this for so long was that I genuinely thought my parents would eventually see reason and make things right. Clearly I was wrong. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since my last update, and a lot has happened. I told my grandparents everything, and just like me, they were completely shocked to learn that my parents had drained my trust fund without my permission. That same week, my grandparents confronted my parents about what had happened. They had worked so hard to set up those trust funds for both me and Corey, wanting to ensure we each had financial support for our futures. Learning that my parents had used the money behind their backs left them understandably furious. When my grandparents demanded answers, my parents repeated the same sob story they told me. They explained how they were forced to spend the money on Corey's treatments and therapies, insisting they had no other choice. They asked my grandparents to understand, as though their reasoning would somehow excuse what they'd done. But my grandfather wasn't having it. He yelled at them, his voice shaking with frustration and disbelief. He made it crystal clear that they were responsible for repaying every cent of the trust fund, no matter the circumstances. His anger was palpable, and I could see just how betrayed he felt by their actions. For a brief moment, I thought my parents might finally take accountability. Then my mom, clearly panicked, began pleading with my grandparents. She talked about how hard it was to take care of Corey, how immense and constant her needs were, and how Corey's trust fund alone hadn't been enough to cover everything. She justified taking from my trust fund as a way to help Corey, framing it as if they'd had no other option. But then, in a move that felt cruel, my parents turned their anger on me. They scolded me for telling my grandparents, furious that I had exposed them. My dad, his voice sharp and angry, told me I should consider myself lucky, because I was born normal, unlike Corey, and that I shouldn't resent her so much. It was as if my own struggles, my future, and my needs didn't matter. Everything revolved around Corey, and I was being punished for refusing to fall in line with the role they'd assigned me. I didn't let their words get to me. I looked them straight in the eye and said firmly that if they didn't repay the money I was owed, I would sue them. I told them I'd make sure they faced legal consequences for what they'd done. I reminded them that what they had done was illegal, and that no court would accept their excuses. The trust fund was meant for me, and they couldn't prove otherwise. My voice was steady, but my words were unyielding. I could see the color drain from their faces as they realized I wasn't bluffing. It was the first time I had truly stood up for myself, and the shock in their eyes was unmistakable. They weren't used to me being this assertive or resolute. Thankfully, my grandparents stood by my side. They nodded in agreement, letting me know they supported me completely. Seeing their encouragement, I spoke with even more conviction. I told my parents it didn't matter how much they had spent on Corey or how difficult it had been to care for her. She was their responsibility, not mine. I made it clear that while I loved Corey and would always care for her as her sibling, I wasn't going to sacrifice my own life, education, and dreams just to make sure she was cared for. I told them I was tired of always coming second to her, tired of being pushed aside while her needs always came first. It was time for me to put myself and my future first for once, and I wasn't going to back down. I ended by telling my parents I was done. I was done being treated like I didn't matter, like the invisible child who was supposed to quietly accept whatever was left over. For the first time in my life, I stood up for myself, and I knew there was no going back. My parents had pushed me to this breaking point, and I wasn't going to let them control my life anymore. My dad immediately argued, his voice full of disbelief and anger. He said I couldn't threaten them with jail because as their child I owed them loyalty. He tried to guilt me, reminding me of all they'd supposedly done for me over the years, as if that excused their actions. My mom, trying to smooth things over, chimed in with an offer. She said I could take the remaining 10% of my trust fund and let the matter drop. It felt insulting, like they were treating me as a charity case, expecting me to accept the scraps and forget everything else. But my grandfather wasn't having it. He stepped in, his voice firm and resolute, and told my parents that if they didn't agree to repay the full amount, he would hire the best lawyer in town and make sure I sued them. The threat of legal action seemed to rattle my parents. They finally fell silent, realizing my grandfather wasn't bluffing. After some tense back and forth, they reluctantly admitted that what they had done was wrong. Still, they asked for time to think things over. The fallout didn't end there. My dad, seething with anger, turned on me. He told me he never wanted to see my face again. He said I was selfish, ungrateful, and a backstabber for exposing them to my grandparents and threatening legal action. He demanded I move out, declaring that he was done supporting someone like me. Hearing this, my grandparents immediately stepped in and offered me a place to stay. They assured me I was always welcome with them, and that they'd support me as I figured out my next steps. Without hesitation, I packed my clothes, grabbed my important documents, and left my parents' house. Now, I'm living with my grandparents. While I hate how my parents just threw me out, I'm relieved to be away from them. I do miss Corey terribly. I know my actions have damaged my relationship with my family, maybe beyond repair, but I don't regret standing up for myself. Update 3. It's been a month since my last update. After relentless pressure and the threat of legal action from my grandfather, my parents finally signed an agreement drafted by his lawyer. The terms were clear. Since they couldn't repay the full amount in one lump sum, they would make payments over the next 18 months. This arrangement gives them time to repay what they owe without overwhelming their finances. The agreement also includes a critical stipulation. If they miss a single payment or fail to follow through, I, along with my grandparents, have the right to take immediate legal action. It's a safeguard to ensure they can't avoid their responsibility. My parents are still furious with me. They blame me for everything that's happened and seem unable to let go of their anger and shame. They don't understand why I took such drastic steps to protect myself and my future. But my grandmother has been my rock through all of this. She reminds me constantly that none of this is my fault, that I did what I had to do, and that I should focus on moving forward instead of looking back. As for Corey, I see her occasionally. She misses me and I miss her too. She often asks my parents about me, but I can tell she doesn't fully understand what's happened. She knows enough to sense that something major went wrong, and she's picked up on the fact that our parents hurt me in some way. It breaks my heart that I can't make her understand the situation, or shield her from the truth about how unfair and selfish our parents have been. Despite everything, I will always be there for Corey. No matter how much our parents have failed us, my love for her hasn't changed. She's my sister, and I'll never stop caring about her, even if being around our parents is too much to bear.